good morning for all of you here on site, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening for all of are joining us online. Well, first of all, thank you for taking the time and the interest to attend our talk. So my name is Sandro Pinto. I'm an associate research professor at the University of Minho in Portugal, and today with me we have Cristiano, which is currently doing his PhD under my supervision. Well, the title of our talk is "Hand Me Your Secret MCU, Microarchitectural Timing Attacks on Microcontrollers Are Practical." Well, I may be a bit biased, but this is a very, very interesting work and attack. Very unique, completely new, was under embargo till today. So apart from the different teams that we contact through the responsible disclosure, you are the ones that will get it in first hand. And before we get started, final note is that I will start the presentation with a few slides. The idea is basically to work as a sort of preview or trailer so that I can get you very excited and motivated for the remaining part of the talk. Well, formal acts for institution and funding agencies. Well, I'm pretty sure you have heard about Spectre and Meltdown, and the discovery of Spectre and Meltdown basically turned the system security upside down, basically by disclose and demonstrate the untapped potential of leveraging the microarchitecture of modern computing to basically leak sensitive information and retrieve secrets. And since then, what we have seen was the disclose of numerous other attacks, microarchitectural side channel attacks, that were able to break or bypass the security isolation and technologies from CPUs from mainstream vendors like Intel, ARM, or AMD. Well, but one particular observation is that these microarchitectural side channel attacks mainly target servers, PCs, and mobiles, or the CPUs or microprocessors that power this device. And the reason is pretty simple and obvious. Over the years, there was a goal while designing these CPUs that was to boost performance. And to basically achieve these performance goals, the architects typically include architectural optimization, but most importantly, microarchitectural optimization. And well, you can find in these CPUs, as of today, very complex microarchitectures, which includes multiple levels of cache to minimize the gap between CPU frequency and memory frequency, but also other architectural elements like prefetchers, predictors, and also very complex pipelines with a lot of different stages like 10, 19 stage, and with design optimizations like speculative execution or out-of-order execution. Well, but on the opposite side of the computing spectrum, we have what is called microcontrollers or MCUs. These computing units are completely different from the others because they are typically very resource constrained in terms of computing power and memory, but they are shipped in the billions annually, and you can find them in pretty much every small embedded or IoT device. I'm talking about, for example, the ARM Cortex-M family. These MCUs have simple architectures, which typically include one single core CPU, other busmasters, like, for example, a DMA, that stands for direct memory access, one or very few memory banks or ports, but they do have a lot of peripherals, and these peripherals are, for example, UARTs, I2C, SPI, CAN, that are used to interface with the physical world. And all of them are interconnected through a bus. And the microarchitecture of these CPUs or MCUs is very simple. They typically don't have cache. They have 2-3 stages of pipelines. And most importantly, and the bottom line comparing to the microprocessors or the APUs used in servers is that they don't have virtual memory. They just work on the physical space. Well, and because they are simple, there is a common belief that MCUs are not vulnerable to microarchitectural timing side channel attacks because their microarchitecture is simple, which seems pretty rational. Well, but we are the sort of people that like or love to take the very difficult challenge, almost impossible challenge, and we decide to challenge this assumption. Well, it turns out that we have identified the MCU bus interconnect, in particular, the timing difference exposed via the arbitration logic as a novel source of side channel. And our key observation is that when multiple bus masters, in particular the CPU unit or the DMA, issue a simultaneous a transaction at the same time for the same memory bank or slave port, the bus interconnect or the arbitration logic will need to stall or delay one of those transactions. And yeah, evolving this simple observation to a channel observation and to successfully mount the attack was very challenging because these microcontrollers are pretty simple. For example, one particular challenge was that they typically just have a single core, one CPU, which basically you cannot run spy code and victim code in parallel. Well, what is pretty unique about our attack and our work is that we leverage the characteristics of the microcontrollers, in particular the widely availability of these peripherals, to introduce what we call hardware gadgets. And to successfully mount the attack, we resort to what we call smart gadget network, which is pretty much these hardware gadgets or peripherals interconnect to automate in the background without CPU intervention, basically some spy logic that create contention while the victim is running. And with that, I'm very happy to share that we have mounted what we call the busted attack. And we mounted the busted attack in the completely state-of-the-art Cortex-M MCUs, ARMv8-M, which they have this technology for security, which is Trust-on-M. And we emulate this attack in the context of a smart lock IoT application. And we use as the trusted application that interface with a trusted keypad one reference application from a manufacturer. And pretty much, all in all, we are able to bypass all the isolation primitives and boundaries from these CPUs. And most importantly, we were able to retrieve the pin code, the secret, completely in real time. Well, this is the preview, the trailer of the talk. So I hope you are engaged at this point. This is the agenda for today, pretty packed. I will start with the first two topics. A quick introduction about side channels, and then provide a bit more details about the MCU bus interconnect as this novel side channel source. Then I will hand it over to Cristiano, which will explain a basic attack example. We'll then provide details about the busted attack, and we'll show a live demo, a video. And I will get back at the end of the presentation just to wrap up and share some final words. Well, OK. In security, there is a class of attacks called side channel attacks. Side channel attacks are a technique that allow attackers to retrieve secrets used in computations, basically by observing the influence or the side effects that those computations have in specific physical properties and the environment. And these physical properties can be related to heat and power, to sound, to electromagnetic radiation, or even to time and many others. Well, this is just one example available in the literature. Here, the attackers were able to basically, using thermal cameras, to recover the heat trace, and based on that, reconstruct the authentication pattern in mobile device. Another example is this one, this paper, RSA key extraction via low bandwidth acoustic cryptanalysis. In this work, basically, the attackers are able, through the sound trace produced by the computer, to retrieve a full 4096 RSA decryption key from a computer. Another exotic attack from a very familiar face from the Black Hat community, Ben Nassi, is this lamp phone attack. And here, Ben basically, by recovering the optical trace from the lamplight bubble, are able to reconstruct sound and speech. Well, Meltdown and Spectre are microarchitectural side channel attacks, and probably the most well-known microarchitectural side channel attacks. And microarchitectural side channel attacks are a particular class of the side channel attacks, where attackers leverage the secret-dependent trace left in the microarchitecture of computers, in particular the timing difference, to basically bypass security isolation mechanism and to leak sensitive information and steal secrets. Well, and here are just a few headlines, recent headlines that clearly demonstrate the hype and number of works around microarchitectural side channel attacks since the release of Spectre and Meltdown. But well, one particular observation is that among the full computing spectrum, and here the bottom line between the microprocessors on the left side, or so-called also application processor units in other architectures lingo, comparing to the microcontrollers, is that the APUs have virtual memory, can run Linux or other operating systems that require virtual memory. The MCUs on the right side just have physical memory, and typically they run just real-time operating systems like Zephyr or any other flavor. And the observation here is that microarchitectural side channel attacks, all of them that you can find, typically just target these application processor units because they are very complex in terms of microarchitectures and have a lot of microarchitectural elements. Well, and we hypothesize that the fact that there is almost no attacks, microarchitectural attacks to MCUs, is because researchers think that, or have the assumption that because the microarchitectural elements that exist on the APUs that doesn't exist on the MCUs, and thus they are somehow biased towards the assumption that it is not possible to replicate. And just to corroborate a little bit, or to convey this idea, we have here on the left side the microarchitecture of the Intel Skylake. On the right side, the microarchitecture of the Cortex M33, pretty state-of-the-art MCU from ARM. And well, this is an image retrieved from the Meltdown paper on the left side. On the right side, if you want to compare the complexity of one microarchitecture with the other, it should be something like this. The idea here is to translate that on the right side, the microarchitecture of the M33 is very, 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 very simple. I mean, there is no one-to-one relation, but the idea is that. For example, zooming in. On the Skylake, we have level 1 instruction cache that we don't have on the M33. We have level 1 data cache that we don't have on the 33. We have unified level 2 data, unified cache that we don't have as well. We have TLBs for handling virtual to physical translation. We have branch predictors. We have more complex pipelines with out-of-order execution, which we don't have as well. So, but in fact, what we have here at the CPU level, we have almost nothing. I mean, we have very simple instruction queues, ALU, and we are just on the physical space. We have no cache memory. So, yeah, this assumption is quite correct. But either way, we decide to put the research question in the sense that which unique microarchitectural elements on MCUs may create new channels, and how can they be used to mount effective attacks? Well, and as I already shared in the preview of the talk, yeah, we identified this bus interconnect as the key element, in particular the timing difference exposed via the arbitration logic. And just to provide you a more clear example, this is a very simple diagram block of a typical MCU with a CPU unit, a DMA, one memory SRAM bank, one flash, and all of those peripherals grouped in the peripherals box. Well, if the CPU wants to access a value in memory, it issues a transaction. Since it is the single one going through the bus to issue the transaction, basically it can access the value and get the value. Well, if the DMA does the same while the CPU is not performing any load store operation or is simply sleeping, yeah, the transaction is issued through the bus and there is no problem. Well, the problem happens when both bus masters, either the CPU and the DMA, want to access the same memory bank. At this point, there is a contention, and at this point, the arbitration logic of the bus interconnect need to prioritize one transaction between the other. In this particular case, the CPU transaction is prioritized, it gets accessed, and the DMA transaction is stalled or delayed in time. And this will expose timing difference. And just to give you empirical evidence about the observation of, or the existence of this channel in several MCUs, we picked 4 MCUs or 4 platforms, which has 4 MCUs from STMicroelectronics, a typical MCU vendor. We pretty much covered the full ARM spectrum, ARM v7M and also ARM v8M, which is a state-of-the-art, M0+, M33, M4, and M7. Well, and we tried to mount a covered channel with 8 bits just to see if the channel exists or not. And as you can see here, we have a very clear, deterministic, noiseless channel in all of the MCUs. Well, I pause here and I hand it over now to Cristiano, which will provide you more details about the attack. And I will get back at the end of the presentation.
Thanks, Sandro. So now I will show and present how we went from a simple microarchitectural channel to a full-fledged attack. So let's start with the basics. Let's assume that we have a spy and a victim that is time-sharing a single core CPU. And the spy wants to create contention on the victim. So it triggers the MEA to do several memory accesses and then invokes the victim. When the victim tries to access the shared memory bank, it will happen contention on the bus, here represented as a multiplexer. So, and on the right side, you can see what will happen at the hardware level. So the bus will see 2 requests to access the memory bank. However, just one can go through. So the arbitration logic of the bus gives priority, in this case, to the CPU, and delays the DMA access to. This creates this delay that is represented on the graphic, and this delay is what will allow us to create a microarchitectural channel and mount the full attack. Furthermore, the MCUs typically have a load-store architecture. This means that only load and stores access data memory, here represented as SRAM. This is an important point, because this allows us to distinguish between normal instructions and load and stores. But this is important because when we see contention on the memory bus, now we can know that the CPU executes a load and store. So let's do a quick bridge and see how can we apply this to the most basic secret-dependent code. That is a if that branches on a binary secret. And let's assume that the victim has this kind of code. So when the secret is 1, the if path will be executed, otherwise the else path will be executed. So these instructions typically are constant and have the same clocks across execution paths. However, there is an exception. When we have a branch instruction that is conditional, it can take 1 clock cycle when there is no branch. And when the branch is taken, it will take 3 clock cycles. So it looks like this. When the if path is executed, the branch will take just 1 clock cycle. When the store tries to access memory, it will create contention, and we will see contention on clock t plus 3. Similar, when the else path executes, the branch equal will execute, but now it will take the branch, and it will take 3 clock cycles to execute. And now we will see contention on the clock cycle t plus 5. So take a notice that both paths took 7 clocks to execute, exactly the same time. So this is not vulnerable to typical timing attacks. However, there is an exception here. The branch equal took 1 clock cycle when the if path is good, and 3 when the else path is good. And this changes the relative position of the store, and this will create contention in different clock cycles. So a spy that is monitored, for example, the clock cycle t plus 3 can know and infer when it sees contention in this clock that the if path is executed and the secret is 1. So this is the basics of our attack, but that is not this simple. So let's go deep. Now I will explain how we went from this toy example to a full-fledged attack that we call Busted. Busted is a single run microarchitectural channel that leverages the arbitration logic of the bus to steal secrets. And let's look at our use case. We try to attack these smart lock devices that typically are present in modern doors, in security vaults, and the main goal of the hacker here is to steal the PIN. And the attack goes something like this. The user introduces the PIN, and there is some kind of malicious code running on the background, and the hacker is able to get that PIN, and is able to get in on the security vault. This smart lock device typically is powered by a Cortex-M, and we target the state-of-the-art Cortex-Ms that have trust zone. So they have these two environments, one untrusted, another trusted, called non-secure as secure world. And inside the secure world runs a firmware, the TFM, and on top of TFM runs our smart lock application that is the victim. That this interface with a trust keypad, and we assume that all the non-secure world is controlled in somehow by the attacker. The attacker also have access to a set of peripherals like timers, DMAs, and share at least one memory bank with the victim. Typically, side channel attacks have 3 phases. So they are some spy attack setup, then the victim executes, and then the spy is able to infer the secret. However, implementing these 3 stages in our attack was not straightforward. And let's see how, why. So this is a representation of our buzz microarchitectural channel appears. So the spy triggers the DMA to do some accesses to a shared memory bank, the victim executes and creates contention, and the spy executes again. However, you cannot see any difference before and after the victim executes at the state level of the microarchitectural component. And this is because the bus is a stateless component, or by other words, it cannot hold over time their states. Typically, this is solved on side channels by putting the spy executing in a second core. So this way, the spy is always executing, and let's assume that the spy has some kind of camera or something to look at the microarchitectural component, and it's able to, when contention happens, like take a snapshot of it and hold this state for the spy to access. So now you have the problem solved, and you have different states. However, not in MCUs, because we are targeting single core MCUs, so you don't have this second core to do the spying. So in addition to that, to have the first challenge, that the bus is stateless, we cannot have concurrent execution of spy and victim. Furthermore, you assume that the victim execution cannot be interrupted, because you assume that there are some kind of countermeasures against interrupt-based attacks, and the interrupts are disabled. And due to the nature of our application, you just have one chance to steal a secret. So like a user will introduce, for example, the PIN once a week or once a month. So we need to retrieve the secret in real time. Typically, the side channels, when they do the attack, they rely on one of these properties. Either the component is stateful, like cache, or when the component is stateless, like ours, they either rely on concurrent execution or interrupting the victim, or they get multiple traces of the victim. So you are in big problem. How did we overcome this? So let's look at our solution. So we start for the principle that we need something to execute at the same time. There is not way around. And typically, these MCUs have a lot of peripherals. And these peripherals are able to run on the background without the intervention of the CPU. So we can group these peripherals, interconnect them, and put them working on the background, implementing some SPI logic. And at this technique, we call hardware gadgets. So with hardware gadgets, we can get our snapshot of the bus contention, and now the SPI can see difference before and after the victim executes. And this solves all our problems. So let's look at one example of hardware gadgets. So hardware gadgets can take several flavors, as much as you have creativity to mount and rearrange these peripherals. But let's look at one that's useful for us. This we call a detect contention gadget, detect contention on real time. And it's built of 3 main blocks: the target memory, where the contention will be created, a DMA, and a timer. So let's look how we would do a detect contention in software. So we'll do an access, a memory copy. We time it, measure the time that it took, and compare with some threshold to see if there was contention or not. So the memory copy can be offloaded to the MEA. The imaging of the time can be offloaded to the timer, as well as the detect contention. And let's see how. So with this, we just offload this algorithm to hardware. And let's see how this all works. So when the MEA starts transfer, at the same time, the timer starts counting. And when the MEA finishes transfer, it writes to the controller register of the timer and stops the timer. This measures the transaction time of the DMA. Let's assume that the contention threshold is like 20 clock cycles. So when there is a transfer that does not create contention, and let's assume that it took 10 clock cycles, nothing happens. However, when there is contention, the DMA writes will be delayed, and the timer will count more cycles. Let's assume that it now counts 25 cycles. It will exceed the contention threshold, and it will generate an interrupt that will signal the contention. So let's go back and try to apply this to our use case attack. This is a snippet of the code that is vulnerable on the application. And this is based on the reference implementation from Texas Instrument to interface a trusted keypad. And is balanced and hardened against timing attacks. So there are some kind of dummy operations that guarantee that the execution of the code is always the same time. So this code has 5 main structures. A while loop that will read the keypad until the 4 digits of the pin are introduced. Then there is some function to read the keypad, and the for loop that iterates over all keys of the keypad and checks if a key was pressed or not. Take notice that this is balanced against timing attacks. So there is if and else, and when the key is not pressed, there is a dummy operation. However, when the key is pressed, the if will be executed. And using our example from the toy example, we know that this is vulnerable because the relative position of a sex to memory will change. So busted attack has mainly 2 phases. A profiling phase that is done in a lab setting where we trace the victim, and other phase that is the real exploit that is done without us in the real world where we steal a secret. So let's look at the profiling phase. In the profiling phase, we use two gadgets, the trigger contention gadget and the record contention gadgets. And basically what this does is monitor each clock of the victim execution and check for contention. This is done for both paths, and at the end of the profiling, we get some trace that will have some different contention points. As for example, let's pick the contention clock cycle 14, and the red means that there was contention. So we know, looking for these traces, that if we see contention on the clock cycle 14, you know that the if path is executed. So let's try to apply now this to the real exploit. So let's assume that the user will press the key 2. So the hardware gadgets are monitoring the clock 14. And so the key 0 is not pressed, nothing happens. Key 1 is not pressed, nothing happens. However, when the key 2 is pressed, in this for loop, the if will be executed, and we'll see contention on clock cycle 14. And you know that the secret is 2. This is done for all the 4 digits of the pin, and you can, this way, steal the secret. So all of this is implementing using all of this machinery. So you have the trigger contention gadget here on the exploitation phase that will trigger 16 times, 1 for each key. And the trusted keypad has 16 keys. This is the reason. And that will trigger a tagged contention gadget that always will monitor the clock that we choose, the 14. There is a counter gadget that will track the index of the for loop. So we'll know which key the for loop of the code is checking. For that, there is this auto-sync gadget that is just keep in sync at the clock level, spy and victim, and the final gadget to read the secret. So the attack goes something like this. In key 0, the else path will be executed. Then in key 1, the else path will execute. And when the if path is executed for key 2, when you press the key 2, we see contention, and we know that this register that the counter gadgets are keeping track of as the secret. So this way you can attack software from hardware. So let's go to the funny part. See the live demo. Just to recap, this is the setup of the demo that I will show. So the spy has some access to hardware gadgets that is monitored and spying on the bus. The smart lock application runs on top of a trusted firmware and interconnects with a trusted keypad, and both have access to a console. So you will have the output in the same console. So now I'm just reset the board. I'm introducing now the pin, and you can see that the TFM boots, the spy executes, keeps and configures all the hardware gadgets, invokes the smart lock application. The smart lock application reads the pin 7506, and in background, the hardware gadgets is able to steal the secret. So I will hand now the presentation back to Sandro, and he will have some final thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Cristiano. Just to wrap up and share some final words about, particular about the responsible disclosure. Well, we can clearly claim that we have presented the first microarchitectural side channel attack for trust on MCUs. And for the responsible disclosure, which was very, very interesting, I think all of us are told that a picture is worth more than 1,000 words, so I would have better no picture than this one to basically summarize the responsible disclosure process. We first reach out to the trusted firmware security team and the ST Microelectronics, which is in fact the MCU vendor. The TFM team basically acknowledged the exploit, quite novel, but they told us that despite the fact that the application is hardened against typical site timing attacks, they have still memory trace, which are not, which have trace, which mean that the application should be the fault, as well as the microarchitecture of the STMCU. Well, the ST has a mixed view. They say that, okay, the application has some trace, so people should program very well and should not left this trace at application. Yeah, but please refer to ARM because, yeah, we have no problem on the microarchitecture, and the problem is from the trust zone architecture, which we don't necessarily agree. And by the way, for the TFM, we kind of agree with them that it's just a framework that will leverage to implement the attack, but we still believe there are some minimal countermeasures that can be applied to mitigate these sort of attacks. Yeah, by the way, with ARM, we have a couple of iterations with them. Yeah, of course, they say as well that the application has some trace, but they for sure say that, yeah, side channels attacks are out of the threat model. I mean, this is like Spectre and Meltdown, like Intel said in the beginning, oh, it's out of the threat model and it works all the time. And by the way, they also said that, okay, but if you demonstrate to us that you can have the same attack, but in a different application, in particular application that we ARM developed, we may change our opinion. And by the way, we acknowledge that there is, yeah, this channel at the end of the day on the bus interconnect, but yeah, this is highly costly to fix. So we are aligned with industry standards, so which mean, yeah, unless you prove us something more, we will keep our view and our perspective. And yeah, at least for us now it's clear that we have the perfect motivation to basically attack a new thing and to demonstrate that may potentially not only leveraging this application, which in fact is a reference from another manufacturer, but we will try with something else, because at this point we have already this knowledge and we can perform much sophisticated attacks. Okay, we are a bit confused, but yeah, we have the motivation. Final black hats on bytes. We have demonstrated empirical evidence that MCUs are vulnerable to microarchitectural side channel attacks, despite the fact that there is this common assumption that they have very simple microarchitectures. We have demonstrated a completely novel class of thread-based microarchitecture timing side channel attacks, and all of the parties acknowledge that. In particular, I forgot to say that ARM is releasing today or tomorrow an article on their website just to comment on our work and to clear that side channel attacks are not part of the trust zone. So it's a first step towards something. And yeah, we have provided the reference attack that bypassed this hardware TE technology on state-of-the-art trust zone MCUs. Well, thank you very much for your time. I hope you have enjoyed as much as we do. And yeah, open to address your questions. We have still 2 minutes, but we will be here right away if you have some other questions to discuss offline. Thank you.
What do you think would be the mitigation of this attack? The application developer write code with constant timing to compensate those delays. That would be of mitigation.
I will let Christian. He's a student, so I need to check if.
So there is a very good question, and what you are asking for is for countermeasure, right? So we have some backup slides. What you should do to avoid these kind of attacks. So the main one is to avoid secret dependent code. And this is right answering your question. So the developer should try to balance this And in our particular case, this case of attack, if we remove the branch equal instruction, the code is now constant time. The relative position of a star does not change, and we can solve this. You can add some more countermeasures, like avoid sharing memory banks. However, this as a catch, because these boards typically they are resource constraints. Some have multiple memory banks, others just have one, and when you have one, you cannot separate the codes. So you can also disable, though there was masters, but now you don't have that capability. And you can have some random delays on the context switch on the firmware that will make unpredictable the traces and enforce some priority-based arbitration policy that is like giving always priority to the bus master of the DMA, and this will always have the priority to access, and you cannot see the delay. So I hope I answered your question.
This was not planned, right? Okay, I think we ran out of time, but we will be here right after the talk, and if you wanted to just chat briefly, please feel free. Thank you.